Inside ADX Florence, the architects of control. Inside the minds that built the most secure prison on Earth. What kind of mind designs a place like ADX Florence? A fortress built not just to contain men, but to erase the very idea of freedom. This isn't just a story about prisoners. It's about the architects, the psychologists, the wardens, the people who engineered silence itself. And to understand ADX Florence, you first have to understand the minds that built it. The blueprint for control in the early 1990s. America was on fire. The rise of violent gangs, drug wars, and high-profile prison murders had pushed the federal system to the brink. Then came Marion, Illinois, the prison that became the prototype for ADX. After 2 correctional officers were brutally killed in 1983, Marion went into permanent lockdown. Cells sealed 23 hours a day. 1 hour of recreation in small metal cages. Marion proved something chilling, that total control worked. Violence dropped, compliance rose. And from that experiment, ADX Florence was born. In 1994, under the leadership of then Bureau of Prisons Director J. Michael Quinlan, the government began constructing what they called a prison within a prison. But ADX was different. This wasn't just about punishment, it was about engineering behavior. The design process involved psychologists, military advisors, and criminologists, all focused on one question: how do you stop violence before it starts? Their answer was simple: remove every possibility of human contact. The architect's vision. The masterminds behind ADX weren't sadists, at least not in their own eyes. They saw themselves as scientists, perfecting a formula for order. One of the lead consultants described the project as a laboratory for human control. The cells were designed like psychological pressure chambers. Every surface, concrete. Every angle, calculated to eliminate blind spots. Every sound, absorbed by the structure itself. Even the light from the tiny slit-like windows was designed to disorient, showing only sky, never the horizon. That way, inmates could never tell where they were inside the compound. This wasn't accidental. It was architecture as isolation. As one architect later said in an interview, "If you can't see the world, eventually you forget it exists." The psychology of obedience. ADX was built on a philosophy called behavioral modification through environmental design. That's a mouthful, but in plain English, it means the environment trains the mind. Every inch of ADX is meant to teach submission, doors that open and close without warning, automated systems that control food slots, light levels, even toilet flushes. The message is constant: you control nothing. Inmates are stripped of every decision: when to sleep, when to eat, when to speak. Over time, their sense of agency fades. Their world shrinks to 8 by 10 feet, and eventually, so does their identity. Prison psychologists call this learned helplessness, a phenomenon first observed in lab animals exposed to inescapable conditions. At ADX Florence, it's no experiment. It's the operating system. The sound of silence. Visitors to ADX often describe the same thing: the silence. Not peaceful silence, but dense silence, a pressure you can feel in your chest. Sound is carefully controlled. Even the ventilation system is designed to muffle voices. Former guards have said you could walk down an entire tier and hear nothing, not even breathing. And yet, within that silence, something else exists. The faint tap of communication, a Morse code language that still echoes through the plumbing and vents. The architects tried to build a prison that killed sound. Instead, they accidentally created a world where sound became sacred. The warden's burden. The people who run ADX Florence face a paradox. They must preserve order in a place that drives men insane. Warden Robert Hood, who ran the facility in the early 2000s, later admitted, "It's not designed for humanity, it's designed for control." Even staff psychologists reported moral exhaustion. Some compared it to working in a hospital for ghosts. You can't touch, can't comfort, can't save. Many wardens over the years have struggled with the ethics of what ADX represents. It's a place where the law meets the limit of morality, and the walls themselves enforce it. The unseen experiment. Few people realize that ADX Florence has been part of behavioral studies funded by the Bureau of Prisons. Psychologists monitored inmate adaptation, charting how long it takes for personality to deteriorate in isolation. Declassified documents mention terms like stimulus deprivation studies and compliance conditioning. It sounds clinical, detached, but the subjects were human beings. For some inmates, the experiment never ended. Even after transfer, they continued to show social paralysis, unable to hold conversations or make eye contact. One former inmate, when released, told a reporter, "You don't realize how much you need noise until it's gone." The ethical divide. To this day, ADX Florence divides experts and moralists alike. Some say it's a necessary evil, the only way to contain the most dangerous men alive. Others say it's a crime against the human mind. Human rights organizations like Amnesty International and the UN Committee Against Torture have condemned the conditions as psychological torture. Yet within the Bureau of Prisons, the counterargument remains strong. Without ADX, the system collapses. It's a terrifying logic, that in order to maintain order, some must be destroyed by it. The invisible chain. Even outside ADX, the influence of its design stretches across America. Hundreds of smaller facilities now use Florence-style isolation units. Central pods modeled after its architecture. From California's Pelican Bay to Virginia's Red Onion State Prison, the shadow of ADX has grown. Its blueprints have become the new gospel of punishment. But here's the haunting truth. The architects may have built a prison for the body, but they accidentally built a mirror for the system itself. A reflection of a society obsessed with control. The sound of a steel door slamming echoes as the narrator's voice lowers. ADX Florence was built to contain chaos. But what if, in doing so, we became part of it? The screen fades to black. How the world's most secure prison changed the meaning of punishment. The world beyond the walls. Outside ADX, Florence, the desert stretches for miles, still, golden, endless. From the highway you might mistake it for a military base. But inside those walls, the definition of control was rewritten. Over time, the Florence model spread to Pelican Bay, Red Onion, Tams, and dozens of state-run supermax facilities. Each one followed the same silent logic: total isolation, total obedience. But as the system expanded, something unexpected happened. The walls of Florence didn't just contain criminals. They exported an idea. The idea that fear is the most efficient form of order. The export of a system. By the early 2000s, architects of ADX Florence were being consulted by other nations. Blueprints, operational plans, and security protocols inspired prison systems in the UK, Brazil, and even Australia. The US exported its supermax philosophy like a product, sold under the banner of efficiency, safety, and modernization. But for human rights experts, it wasn't progress. It was contagion. Professor Craig Haney, one of America's leading prison psychologists, warned in 2006. "We are building institutions that destroy the human need for connection, and calling it corrections." The design of Florence had become a blueprint for global isolation. The prisoner that never leaves. Not every prisoner at ADX Florence is famous, but each carries the same fate: silence. Terrorists, spies, gang leaders, and high-risk offenders all vanish behind the same grey steel. Men like Ramzi Youssef, mastermind of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, Theodore Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, Boston Marathon bomber, each living in solitary cells, never allowed to speak or touch another inmate. The official line calls it administrative control, but inside the Bureau of Prisons, it's known by another name, the Black Hole. An officer who worked the facility for over 15 years said, "You walk that corridor and it's like time doesn't exist. Every sound, every breath is measured. You realize, nobody truly leaves Florence. Even those who die there are often buried under bureau numbers, their names fading from memory, their stories sealed." The cost of perfection. Every system has a price, and Florence's perfection comes at a cost that no audit can calculate. Each inmate in ADX costs nearly 4 times more than one in a regular federal facility. But the real cost isn't money, it's psychological currency. Doctors who've studied inmates released from ADX describe symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress, schizophrenia, and sensory disassociation. One psychologist summarized it this way: "They're alive, but the part of them that connects to the world is gone." For guards, it's not much different. Long-term exposure to isolation culture changes how they think, how they feel. One former Florence officer admitted, "After a while, you start whispering too, even when you're home." The quiet debate. Publicly, ADX Florence is rarely discussed. The Bureau of Prisons releases few photos, no live footage, and carefully censored data. Even Congress receives limited briefings. Yet behind closed doors, the debate is growing louder. Is ADX the pinnacle of justice, or its failure? The United Nations Committee Against Torture called its conditions inhuman and degrading. Even Pope Francis, in a 2015 address, condemned the soul-killing practice of long-term isolation. But within the US, officials argue back, saying that ADX Florence has saved countless lives, prevented attacks, and maintained stability in the federal system for nearly 30 years. So the question lingers in the silence: can justice survive if it loses its humanity? When the walls start talking, every prison tells a story. But Florence tells none. That's the point. But when researchers began studying the facility's sound design in 2018, they found something eerie. Even after maintenance shut down the air systems for repair, guards still reported faint tapping sounds, as if the walls themselves remembered. It wasn't supernatural. It was the echoes, trapped layers of sound bouncing through the vent system, recording the history of human communication in captivity. A chilling metaphor. Even silence remembers. The experiment's shadow. 3 decades after it opened, Florence remains the standard of control. But it's also the warning sign of what happens when control becomes the goal itself. One warden, now retired, described the paradox best. ADX was built to stop chaos. Instead, it showed us how easily chaos becomes policy. That's the real legacy of Florence, a system so efficient it no longer questions itself. It has become the machine that runs too well to ever be turned off. The legacy of silence. As the sun sets over the Colorado desert, Florence stands untouched by time, its walls bathed in the dying light, its cells glowing faintly with sterile brightness. Inside, the men who live there are reduced to ghosts of their former selves. Outside, the world moves on. Politicians campaign, budgets renew, policies expand. But the idea of Florence lingers, not just as a place, but as a philosophy, a belief that absolute security is worth any cost. And perhaps that's the most dangerous idea of all. In the end, ADX Florence isn't just a prison. It's a reflection of us. It shows what happens when justice becomes control and safety becomes silence. The question isn't whether we can build stronger walls. We already have. The question is, who will we become inside them? Fade out. Camera pulls back from ADX under the moonlight. The desert wind howls faintly, carrying the last line of the narrator's voice. Even silence leaves an echo.